eventually we want to get into a predictive way of working. I know it's the holy grail, a lot of people talk about it, but it starts with the boring stuff. You need to have the process, then you need to have the tech, then you need to have the data. And once you put all of this together, then you can start getting some meaningful insights.
You're very welcome to another episode of Hiring Excellence. My name is Johnny Campbell. I'm the host for this podcast and CEO and co-founder of Social Talent. And today, our guest is joining us to talk about something that I think is topical for many of you, and that's insourcing a TA team, which goes against a show we had a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about outsourcing a TA team. But whether you've brought a TA team in-house or you've basically outsourced to RPO, I think what you're going to learn today in this conversation is that the common thread is the importance of process and structure. And many of you have gone through this from moving from a CEO model to a centralized model. Some of you have done it from insourcing, outsourcing. And many of you are just going through this because you're trying to automate your processes or bring in AI for the first time and learning that without the right process and structure, none of that works. And that's going to be the common theme for our guest today. That guest is Rohit Joshi. Rohit is the head of talent acquisition for Sanofi. Sanofi may be known to many of you, particularly if you're in Europe, where they're headquartered. And we're going to be walking through the journey that Rohit's been on over the last few years. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce Rohit to the show. Rohit, you're very welcome. Perhaps you might take a minute or so just to introduce yourself, tell us about your career, your background, maybe start with where you're joining us from today.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Great to be here. I'm joining you from Amsterdam, which has been home for me for the past 12 years. So I lead the talent acquisition function at Sanofi. Previous to this, I've had similar leadership roles in Coca-Cola, in Philips, and Infosys. It's always fascinating to work in different industries and look at how talent acquisition problems or challenges are approached when the business models are different, when the margins that you deal with are very different. Indian by birth, but I've been fortunate enough to live around the world. So lived in Japan for a while, the Philippines, London, and now Amsterdam. And that has added a lot to my learnings, both personally and professionally.
Before we started, we were exchanging some advice on parenting. We might do a separate podcast on parenting. I know you've two girls who are growing into their teenage years, Rohit. So as I said to you before you joined, for those of you who are watching this podcast, Rohit has a fine head of hair, which he's managed to keep despite pulling it out several times. Unlike myself, who you can see has lost most of his. Rohit, for those not familiar with Sanofi or Sanofi as it's often pronounced, tell us about the organization, its impact on potentially our lives or our families' lives, the culture of the organization as well, and maybe some of the history of how it's come together.
Absolutely. So Sanofi is an R&D driven AI powered pharmaceutical organization. It's part of the big pharma list. So we have over 75,000 employees in over 70 countries, revenues in the range of about 45 billion. We work in many therapeutic areas, mainly in the immunology and the vaccine space. Our mission is very clear. We are chasing the miracles of science to improve patients' lives.
An impressive objective, and one that the company has achieved, but not only through its products does it live these values. I remember several years ago, we had your colleague Raj on the podcast, and he talked about the culture. Remind us of that very unique culture and the importance of inclusion across the globe for the organization and how it plays out perhaps for you and your team.
Now, culture is absolutely important in Sanofi. We are a company which has grown through acquisition. So many members have joined the Sanofi family over time. And the best way to work with people from different nationalities, from different ethnicities, from different backgrounds is to ensure that they have a sense of belonging. And that's very critical in everything that we do. A good business example, patient example of how we do it is when we moved through phase 3 trials. Whenever you have drug development, you go through various stages of trials. When we do phase 3 trials, we ensure that the population that are working with us is also representative of the communities that we work with. So we ensure that the trial population has the right mix of gender, age, diversity, ethnicity, all of those things. Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to serve all the communities across the board. And that has to come through.
So when you joined the business, TA was essentially outsourced, and 90% of it was outsourced. Talk to us about what you inherited what the remit was and why the change was I guess felt necessary at the time.
Sure. So before I do that, let me sort of give you a sense of the scale that we are dealing with. So Sanofi, the team that I work with or lead, we fill in about 20,000 positions annually. To do that, we do about 100,000 interviews. We get close to 1 million applicants. So it gives you a sense of the size and scale of the problem that we're dealing with. Um, People at a different point in time decided that outsourcing was the way to go, and that's fine. Different solutions as the company evolves. We were 90% outsourced when I walked in the door. Now, outsourcing is not good or bad. It's a question of how you're managing it and what is right for the organization. At that point of time, what we really felt was Sanofians sell the Sanofi story the best. It's really important that we control the narrative. We are managing all the information which goes out there. We can move quickly with agility to get to what the business really requires, and the best way to do it was to gain a level of control back into the system, which meant that we swung the pendulum. So from being an outsourced function, 90% outsourced about 3 years ago, we are in a talent transformation. By the end of this year, we'll be about 36% outsourced. So that's how we are doing. We are very intentionally bringing the talent acquisition function back in-house.
Sometimes when a function is outsourced, it has already been centralized, global processes built, and then that's supported perhaps by an RPO or outsourcing provider. That wasn't the case. You had two challenges: one, to bring it in-house, but second of all, to develop global standards and centralization. Because my understanding is, and correct me if I'm incorrect on this, Rohit, it was quite decentralized, different countries doing different things, different processes, wasn't always common. So walk me through the, I guess, range of challenges you were taking on in this project.
Okay. You are right. We were very decentralized, not only as a talent function, that was a bit of a mirror of how our business was set up. So again, to bring it back into the talent space, we had 14 RPOs working with us across the globe. So you can imagine 14 RPOs means 14 slightly different ways of working. So the experience which a candidate gets in the US is different from what he or she gets in Germany, which is different from what he or she gets in China. So that led to a variation in the way we do things. We couldn't really achieve economies of scale, right? A good example of that is part of the function I lead is the employer branding function. I think our career site is amazing. It's really good, and I would encourage you to go and take a look at it right now. But 3 years ago, we didn't have a career site. We had 100 career pages. So now that's not possible if you sort of put everything back together. So just one small example to give you a sense of sometimes putting things together allows you to go faster and allows you to have that consistency. So there's a standard of excellence which is maintained across our footprint.
So, Rob, we've talked about this before, but I think you share my view that you start with your structure or architecture, and then you build out your processes, and then you enable the business to deliver. So walk me through step one, the architecture that you were trying to build. What did you envision? What were you trying to set up, and why?
Okay. Whenever you do this, it's very important to have business buy-in. Let's start with that, because we're not running an HR academy or an HR school. Everything that we do is to serve the business, who in turn can then serve the patients, right? So that's how we think about it. So when we started looking at the talent acquisition function, we first started off saying, where is it that we want to go? We plotted ourselves up on a maturity scale. We said we are on point X, we want to be in point Y in 4 years' time. Now, to get from point X to Y, what's the right approach? What are the milestones that we need to do? And that's where the whole centralization idea came in, right? You're very correct. I'm a strong believer in processes over technology, right? And it's really important, to have a level of consistency that we have across the board. Again, for those who are slightly more technical, let me give you a Workday example. I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with that. When we had configured Workday for us in the past, it was configured at a country level. Right? So you can again imagine processes being different. So first you needed to define what a global process is going to be like, and then put the technology behind it to support the process. Along with that, then we also started looking at the capabilities within the function. As we had outsourced part of, or the major part of our function, we had sort of lost that internal muscle, right? And 3 years ago, we decided then to set up teams, which you would expect in mature organizations. So we set up an executive hiring team that did not exist 3 years ago. We set up an employer branding function. We also set up a talent intelligence team just recently. We set up a talent sourcing team. It was for a very particular side. We expanded the team. So for me, these are table stakes for a large organization, which we have now moved on to that curve. So we very clearly mapped out the maturity scale. Where is it that we want to be? Built milestones and then started investing very intentionally into those teams. So all of this then comes together to ensure that we become a cohesive, holistic talent function.
And what was your regional strategy? I get the centralized functions you mentioned, exec hiring, employer branding, talent intelligence, sourcing, making a lot of sense. But walk
Yeah.
me through the kind of regional execution of that, the delivery teams. Did they remain in country or were they more centralized in different regions?
Yeah. So in the past, we had delivery teams which were based in countries, and then the heavy lifting, if I can call of that, was outsourced to RPOs. Right. The model that we have now moved to is we retain the delivery team in countries, but a very specific, almost like a SWAT team within the organization. We have moved to an account manager model, so they look at the senior level hiring. They're the ones closest to the business, but we have built out our own internal teams in what you call as GCC, so Global Capability Centers. So we have set up centers in Hyderabad in India, supporting Asia. We have got one in China in Chengdu. We have got one in Budapest, which supports Europe. We have one in Bogota, which supports the Americas. All of these have been set up in the last 18 months, and they really are the engine. So you have a team which is now, again, based in the countries closer to the business, and then they can take the support of these teams which are dispersed across the globe. What it allows us is a lot of flex because you will have some parts of the region which are busier than other parts. And this is where we can leverage on our own teams and flex our resources based on what the business needs at that time.
I remember, Rohit, about 8.5, 9 years ago, drawing the model you've described on a whiteboard for a friend, and saying, this is the model. It works. It scales. And in my head, I couldn't understand how people didn't have such a model. And still today, a lot of organizations don't have the model. Arguably, that's the easy bit. Sketching it out and saying this is what it should look like is the easy bit. Walk
Yep.
me through how the business reacted, though, to the change from having my local HR/recruiting person or PO provider helping me with my processes and my configured workday to a globally efficient organization with this kind of global structure in business partners within region, but working to the global standard, not necessarily to a country standard. Did that cause tension? Was there resistance? Walk me through the change management of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Uh, of course, there was an element of resistance because change is always difficult, right? People need to be convinced of why the change is going to be there. So first, we outlined what is it that we are proposing, what is the business going to get through it, and then we started working through things. So let me give you a few examples. So when we said this model is going to be in place, it's going to deliver a much higher quality of hire, right? It's going to definitely increase the speed of hiring at a better price point. So those were the three things, but that still did not change the mindset because
Mm.
in the old Sanofi, people had complete control over their part of the ecosystem, right? And there was a lot of duplications. So we have extremely smart people, which meant that there were a lot of duplicative projects working on in different parts of the world, but we did not have those economies of scale. And the mindset shift was we need to think of one Sanofi. Let me give you an analogy, and hopefully that will land well. So if you think of the organization Sanofi as, let's say, an apartment block, in the past the individual apartments or the flats, depending on how you call it, depending on which world you are, were more important than the entire apartment, right? So people were more concerned about how their own apartment look rather than the overall building. The mindset now is the building is more important than the apartment, which
Mm.
means that if you need to lose a wall here or there to make the structure stronger, you go with it. And
Mm.
that took some getting used to. It meant going to a country saying you don't need to have five of the same people because that can be done by a team which is going to service four countries together because you don't have that amount of work. The predictive modeling doesn't show it's not a good use of investment. But that took some convincing, and then with data we showed them that it is the right answer. Now, of course, it wasn't smooth sailing. We are still on our transformation, and the mindset very much is progress over perfection.
We've had Elias Sabino from Syngenta on the podcast a couple of times. Most recently, he was talking about how when he had to centralize from a decentralized TA team in Syngenta, the big concept or mindset he had to get over, and it's a very similar analogy than you've given us, Rohit, was he said he had to move on from a community to a team. He said we're no longer a TA community, which is like the apartments that we all say we're the community, but fundamentally this is about my home. He said we're a team, and the team have to come together to win together and not individually. And that's a different mindset. But did you find it was easier? Or maybe I'm making an assumption here. Did you find it was easier that you had new people coming in? I imagine hiring new folks who had never worked under the old system. Did you find it was easier for them to just have that mindset from day one, that team or whole building approach? Or did you have some legacy folks who were previously in the old model who had to transition?
Yeah. Um, we're very fortunate to have a strong team. I'm very fortunate to have a strong team, and that's a mix of people who have been with the organization for many many years, as well as a set of folks who decided to be with us through the journey. And I think that mix is important. You
Mm,
can't do this with everyone new because they don't understand the culture, the history, the context. You can't do it with everyone who's been there because change takes that much time. What really helped us along was spending a lot of time with the individual leaders, because you can't do this by one small team sitting in Paris or in Amsterdam. This is a global thing, and co-creating with them. So this was not created in a small dark room in Paris where someone agrees and people execute. A lot of it was co-creation. We tested the ideas with the business. We tested it with the other PNC leaders that we had. We had multiple opportunities for people to give their suggestions, amend it. So when we actually came in saying this is the model that we want to present, everyone had their fingerprints on it. And that was really, really important, because the more people you have in the ideation process, there's more skin in the game and they are with you as it gets into execution. So we were again lucky to have people co-creating with us. That was very much a philosophy. And that is where people who have been in Sanofi for a long time, their experience, the legacy information, the tribal knowledge that they had really, really helped us. And that added with the new people coming in was a great combination.
When you reflect on the last few years, Rohit, what do you think it was from your own personal experience that helped you manage this quite massive change? Like, were there roles or companies you worked in or leaders you worked under that you said, you know what, this is where I can transfer this past experience to this new environment?
Yep. One of the advantages of setting something new is we were not, if I can use the word, shackled by old processes or previous ways of
Mm,
doing it. So if we did not have an employer branding function, that's an advantage, because I'm lucky enough to have a very strong employer branding leader, Dan Perkins, in my team. He comes with great experience with Rolls Royce and others as well. So he got in knowledge of how it is done in other organizations, which works, and we could sort of put that into place. We have Gabriela Chalova, who heads our executive recruitment team. She comes in from Noble and other industries as well. So she got some of the best practices there. So when you're building these new teams, you are not sort of stuck in this is what my industry does, this is what it does. You look at what are best practices world outside. You then apply it to what is the reality of Sanofi and the culture that we have, and then you come to a happy medium. So that was an advantage. So it was a two-prong approach. Whatever is new, you can build from scratch, and then whatever is there, you slowly start working on it and then moving it in the right direction.
I love that. You also mentioned that at the outset, there are probably three objectives, and they're quite traditional KPIs that in TA we measure. Well, bar one maybe, which we try and measure, often unsuccessfully. But speed, cost, and quality were the three big things you were looking to improve on. First of all, walk me through how you succeeded or not succeeded on those metrics. And then tell us about how you're thinking about those metrics evolving. What other metrics have you brought in or evolved your thinking to try and look at, and why?
Yeah. So a disclaimer, we are still in the process of landing the model. So we should be there by the end of this year. But by the time we actually land, we expect our speed to go up by about 25%, right? We expect our cost per hire to go down by 20%, right? And when it comes to quality, as you mentioned, that's a very interesting one, because there are many definitions of quality of hire, right? You can go to SHL, Gartner, you'll find different ones. What we're trying to work on at the moment is a Sanofi definition of quality of hire. So we just want to definitely agree this is what we mean, and then you put it almost in a dashboard, right? So that helps us understand the impact that you're bringing. So that's one. The other kind of KPIs or impact areas that we're looking at is we also see that when we hire people, especially at a senior level, Are they on the succession pipeline of business leadership? I can give you one example. We have one business unit, and we looked at their leadership team and their succession pipeline. So basically, their N minus one and N minus twos, and 50% of their successors were hired in the last 18 months. So for me, that's an important criteria because it shows that the people that we are bringing in are the ones which are considered as successors going ahead. This is where a big shout out to our executive hiring team. Thanks to the great work that they have been doing, they have strengthened the succession pipeline, but purely in dollar terms, they have saved the organization almost 25 million when it comes to cost avoidance. So if done well, yes, there's a money angle to it, but it really improves the quality of the people because at the end of the day, what the talent function is there for, whether it's talent acquisition or talent management, is essentially to ensure the health of the talent pipeline,
Mm.
right? What I really ask my team to think of is what they are risk managers. They're just managing the business risk from a talent perspective. They need to think of today, but you need to put in systems in place so it outlives us. So, what is going to happen 3 years from now, 5 years from now, to the best of our knowledge?
I love that. And on that future piece, you did mention obviously that you're not necessarily there yet. You're still working through 26 to achieve some of those goals. Talk to me about what the goal is for the rest of this year. And then going forward from here, what would you hope for the next year, 2, 3 years from the team? What's next for you and that team?
Okay. The goal for this year is very simple and straightforward. As we are moving through a massive change, as I said, from 14 RPOs now to really to bringing it in house, it's really to ensure that the move happens in a seamless, smooth way. Business continuity occurs, and we manage to get through this with as little noise as possible. Right, so the business should not feel the impact of the change. Again, I'm not naive. I go back to progress over perfection. This is the right approach and we have our team's backing, but that's the main goal that we have. As we go ahead, what we are seeing is now immediately, even with all the work that we are bringing in-house, we are sitting on a lot of data,
Mm.
and we never had that before in an outsourced setup. So now we are looking at data. We want to see what sources work for us. We want to link it to performance data going ahead, right? We are now working with our analytics team. We are working with Vizier as well. So eventually, with all the data, with these processes in place, with things working well, eventually we want to get into a predictive way of working. I know it's the holy grail. A lot of people talk about it, but it starts with the boring stuff. You need to have the process, then you need to have the tech, then you need to have the data, and once you put all of this together, then you can start getting some meaningful insights, right? And that's where we want to get to next year and the year after.
What excites you? I know we're nearly out of time, but what excites you most about some of the emerging tech in RPA or AI or whatever you want to call it that you're seeing similar organizations begin to experiment with and deploy? What do you think? What do you think we'll be all using in a couple of years, or you'll be particularly maybe looking at? Or what problems are you trying to solve? Maybe less about the tech, but what problems do you think we can solve with this tech?
Yeah. Um, if you look at a recruiter or a talent person, you start doing a simple old fashioned time and motion study and ask people where do they spend their time. I would bet that you say that you only really go into deep work for 30 to 40% of your time, if at all. Most of the time is spent on emails, working on admin and operational stuff and so on. I would love for it to flip it. So if we can move the deep work, the value added work from 30% to 70%, that's a big shift. And that's where technology helps. So technology is an enabler. I don't see it as replacing people, right? But I absolutely see it as, they replace the tasks and they give people the time back. And the ones for me that will succeed ahead are the ones which will make good use of the time, right? And for me, that is what differentiates someone who's going to get ahead. It's how they think. If I have all of this time, what do I do with it? How do I get to know the business better? How do I get to know the talent market better? How do I sell the story? Am I assessing people correctly, right? Technology is going to make all of this frictionless, sorry, so that you use the time well. So that's for me is the biggest thing. And of course we can get into the kind of tools which are dealing with it, but overarching, that's what I'm trying to get the team to.
Have to hold your thoughts on the tools for another podcast, but maybe if I can ask you one last question, if you don't mind, Rohit. Um, I mentioned at the top of the podcast that a challenge in implementing those tools and looking at those tools is that there's no point in automating a poor process. And
Yeah.
so for a lot of leaders, they're looking at the tools as the solution to all their problems. Where the reality is, for those who've been on a more mature journey here, is you have to get the processes right first. And then you can automate and scale some of those things, to your point around reducing the admin. And you're probably in a fortunate position to have started with that focus, getting the processes right, scaling them, and that probably even a very good position to automate and bring in tools to take the admin away. So, what would be your key learning, if there was one, maybe two key learnings
Yeah.
around how to go about doing that massive change and getting the processes right? Is there a framework of use, a process, a hint, a tip you can give to other leaders listening today who are facing into that journey?
Okay. Um, I wouldn't, I mean, there's no magic formula on this. I think what you need to be very clear is the objective of why the process is there in the first place, right? Understand who all the stakeholders are there, and then put a process in place which A is seamless, is quick, and delivers what you need, right? And then you see what tech is going to allow you to get there faster. There's a shiny coin syndrome, especially in the talent acquisition space, right? Where there's new tech, and it's really interesting tech which comes in almost on a daily basis. The challenges that we have, especially for an organization like ours, is does it scale? Does it work across 70 countries, 50,000 employees with all the GDPR and the legal regulations around it? That's when it tends to fall flat at times. So again, my sense is go back to process over technology, ensure all the stakeholders are in place, and don't forget the candidate and the hiring manager, because it sounds super simple, but many times we only look at something from our own lens, right? And it's almost like you need to remind ourselves who are all the people in there and almost do a persona study. How is everyone going to be looking at the process from their perspective, and does it make sense for them and for you as an organization?
Rohit, I particularly love that last point. We've done workshops. I've been part of workshops where we take the hiring journey from the candidate's perspective, the recruiter's perspective, the hiring manager's perspective, and they're all different. And you would optimize differently for each of those. So you're dead right. You got to walk in those different shoes to understand what the whole process might look like. Rohit, it's been such a pleasure to hear your story, share your insights. We've so much more we could talk about. I know we're tight for time. I really appreciate you taking the time today to share that with us. Maybe we'll come back and talk to you about your favorite tools on one of our ST lives over the coming months. But until then, real pleasure to talk to you. I hope that's given a lot of value for our audience, and I hope you come back again.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks again, Joy.
And thank you for listening this week. I hope you really enjoyed those insights from Rohit. Done a phenomenal job in a very short space of time. And that kind of centralization of processes and defining best practice is something most of us are going through before we can scale and automate, which we're all under enormous pressure to do. So great to hear the insights on such scale. We'll be back next week with another great episode, another fantastic guest who I'm really looking forward to. Until then, take care.